Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Marc Steiner. Great to have you all with us. You know, the mainstream media reports that Trump's back is against the wall, that he knew all about the alleged Russian dealings and collusion by Trump is the operative phrase of the moment. But what is the real significance of all this alleged Russian experience and intervention in American elections? What are we missing in all of this? My friend and colleague here, Real News, the editor-in-chief himself, Paul Jay, joins us to delve into that right now. Paul, good to have you here.
Thank you.
So let's get into this. So let's talk a bit about, the mainstream media focuses almost entirely on, did Trump collude with the Russians? All these people around him are being indicted and questioned by Mueller. So is it real? And did it throw the election to the Republicans, or didn't it throw the election to the Republicans? Now, from our conversations we've had before, clearly you think something is missing the mark here in terms of what we should be covering, right?
Excuse me. I think you got to parse. There's many different issues here, and you have to parse them out a bit. There is, did the Russians interfere in the U.S. elections in order to elect Trump? If so, did it have any effect? The second thing is there a kind of corruption that's alleged, whether it's money laundering and such, second bucket of things that needs to be looked at. But I think the most important thing that the corporate media is doing, and they're doing because it drives ratings, and the Democratic Party corporate leadership are doing, I wouldn't say the whole Democratic Party is doing it, because there's, especially some of these new progressive members of Congress are not doing this. But they're dredging up the demons, the ghosts of the Cold War for partisan political advantage. That's the Democratic Party. The military-industrial complex, they have their, at least the narrative from the Second World War, which has as an existential threat, first the Soviet Union, then the Russian Federation. It actually really goes back right to 1919. So we're talking 100 years of deep culture of using the communist specter and now the Russian specter as a rationale and justification for a massive military budget. So it doesn't mean there isn't real contention and real competition, but you need to parse what the real effect on the elections was from this issue of the narrative of the essentially a Russia that wants world domination, which is a continuation of the idea the Soviet Union wanted domination, which justifies aircraft carriers that cost $13 billion apiece. It justifies $1 trillion being spent on upgrading the American nuclear arsenal, and so on. So I think I don't pretend to be an expert on the minutiae of the Mueller investigation, but from what I know, take bucket number one. Did the Russians try to interfere in the American elections? Well, there seems to have been a meeting in Trump Tower. Trump Jr. seems to have admitted to it. It seems that he's admitted to the fact he was trying to see if Russians and Russian intelligence had some dirt that could be used on the Clintons. Okay, for the sake of argument, let's assume that's true. There seems to be enough smoke and confessions so far such a meeting took place. Is this rise to the level of daily corporate news coverage that's more important that we have a climate denier that's president? Is it more important that they are deregulating Wall Street? Is it more important that the geopolitical rivalries that gave rise to world wars in the 20th century are starting to boil again? Is it more important, and for those who've watched the Real News and just saw this series of interviews I did with Daniel Ellsberg, that we're still sitting on a doomsday machine, both a Russian and an American doomsday machine? Like the big issues that really matter, and of course, healthcare, and the immigration issues, like critical burning issues. So why is the media so focused on this? Well, because there's some blood in the water, and they love covering partisan rivalry because it's like a football game. It drives ratings. And clearly there's some real schisms in the American state. Sections of the state, one, are worried that Trump's kind of a loose cannon, And two, there's sections, I think, of the state, deep state military-industrial complex that don't want any kind of reconciliation, or I should say normalization, with Russia. It doesn't help the narrative that you don't need Ford-class aircraft carriers to fight ISIS. So, in short, what I'm saying, to attack Trump, to expose either criminality of Trump on the corruption side, or even on the election side, we should not buy into feeding the chauvinist hysteria against Russia, which feels, as I say, bringing up the ghosts of the Cold War. Russia is a mid-sized capitalist country, has an autocratic government that mostly came into being because the Soviet economy after 1990 was demolished and to a large extent facilitated by the United States, that loved the idea of the rise of these oligarchs. So it's a state that the Americans had a hand in creating. And yeah, it's a competitor on the global stage. But it's not an existential threat. And who's it a competitor with? It's a competitor with the American oligarchy. It's not a competitor with the American people.
Well, so there's a lot here. I mean, I'm trying to unpack some of this in the time we have. I mean, so one question. Well, why is the media, most of the media, covering this with the intensity it is? And part of that, though, I think, has to do with the fact that this could be the downfall of a U.S. president.
Yeah.
Which is why they're covering it.
It's a good political story.
Right? And this could be the unraveling of the Trump presidency. That is a huge story for anybody to cover.
Yeah.
And so I think the headlines are probably warranted. He probably stepped into a bag of manure, knowingly or unknowingly, because sometimes I'm sure he knows what he's doing. And he just steps into this bag of manure and it's spread all over him and he doesn't know what to do about it. So he's stuck. And they smell blood and they're going to go after him and they're going to try to take him down this way. So
And I wish them well.
I do too.
What I mean by that is, if you don't feed the chauvinism, if you don't feed the Russophobia, then sure, go get them. And I like the fact that the Trump administration and the fact I've always, for years, praised what they call gridlock in D.C. I love when these guys can't come to an agreement on something, because most of the agreements that they come to are not good for the American people. So the fact that they are distracted, that there's blood in the water, they're fighting, good on them. Because I don't think if the Trump administration could have a more consolidated, less distracted agenda, I'd be more afraid of what would happen both domestically and internationally. But we cannot buy into the chauvinist hysteria, which can lead to war, which can, don't watch this Ellsberg thing I did. Don't underestimate how easy it is for this nuclear arsenal to be unleashed in error, and the atmosphere is brewing for this. So, like I said, when this thing first broke out, I said we should not side with either oligarchy. I don't side with the Russian oligarchy, and I don't side with the American oligarchy. We, the people, here, we got to deal with the American oligarchy, and I hope the Russian people deal with the Russian oligarchy.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree with a lot of what you said at all. Though I think that, I mean, the United States has a long history of interfering in elections. Long history. And of overthrowing governments, from Arbenz in Guatemala and all the other, Iran.
Diefenbaker in Canada.
You love that one.
I love that one, because nobody ever heard of that one.
For who? So, right. Yeah, right. In 1961. 60,
yeah.
something like that.
We'll tell that story another time.
There's another time, but they didn't want, for America not to want a certain Canadian to win, which really was absurd. But anyway. So the United States has done this for a long time, but I would also say that the Soviet Union and Russia have done in both their formations have done the same things, undermining elections.
And the Germans engineered the downfall of the Albanian government. I mean, all these capitalist powers extend their power as much as they can. The Soviet Union essentially became a kind of state capitalism, and even before, they all do the game. But here's the difference: if you're going to compare, no state has committed the crimes on the global scale since World War II, the United States has. There's nothing that compares with it. From the Vietnam War to the Iraq War, I mean, you go on with it. There is no comparison on a global scale of war crimes So whatever the Russian state is guilty of from the rise of Putin on, and they've committed lots of crimes as far as I can make out, it's nothing compared to what the United States has done.
So, but that says what? I mean, about...
It means let's be honest about the situation, because this idea that the Russians undermined American democracy. I mean, you know, my joke has been from the beginning of this thing was the only reason the American elites are upset that the Russians interfered in the U.S. elections, assuming they did, and I'm still not so sure, but let's say they did, is because it's the American elites' job to rig American elections. You know, what affects the, you know, what's more rigging than Citizens United and unlimited funding, gerrymandering? I mean, the undermining of American democracy is because American democracy always was a bit of a shell, and now it's worse than a shell.
So, I mean, a couple things, man. Well, we might disagree on this one level. Is I think there's no doubt in my mind the Russians attempted to interfere in this election. I think that, to me, it's crystal clear everything I've been reading over the last couple of years. That notwithstanding, they didn't win the election for Trump. The Democrats lost the election to Trump for lots of reasons. We could get into it some other time. So all that to me is very real.
And I just want to say, I do not take American intelligence agencies on faith. And I think it's a very important point we've been making at The Real News, that just because the intelligence agency says something without putting evidence in the public domain, we shouldn't believe it. So I don't know what to believe about what the Russians did or didn't do. Do I think there's pretty good evidence that Trump had, or the Trump camp at least, tried to get the Russians to give them dirt on Clinton? There seems to be a case there.
It does.
And maybe there's more. But in the scheme of things, the only reason it rises to the level of any importance is what you said. It's become a way to bring down Trump. So as a political story, sure, it's a good story. But it's a political story because of the partisan politics of it, and the split within the American state, the fact that the FBI and sections of the American state want to bring down Trump. But to feed the idea that Russia is this existential threat that wants to take over the world, that we're defending the world, we're defending democracy from this big bad enemy, that's all BS. And we should say so. And then after that, sure, let's cover the Mueller investigation.
No, I hear you. But I think that I mean, Russia does not want to take over the world.
Let me back up. If they could, they might want to. They can't.
They can't.
And so, you know, it's not...
But the danger is that people...
They don't even have an economy as big as Canada's.
But the danger here, the danger of a critique like the one you're positing, that could come out of a critique, like it could come out of what you're positing, is that sometimes the left falls into this knee-jerk, I'm going to defend Russia against these attacks, which I think is a real mistake.
I agree. I agree. This is a global system, a capitalist global system, oligarchs in various countries whose interests converge and diverge. Sometimes they diverge so much they go to war, and who pays the price? Working people of those countries. And then they converge again. So, I mean, Germany, that was the great enemy for two great wars, is now the great ally. And who knows, 10 years of depression and the rise of a far-right nationalist government in Germany, it could happen again. I mean, you know, the bottom line is us, the peoples, can't think we're in the same boat of the oligarchs. That was happened before World War I. You know, and whole sections of the left started to support their own oligarchs, their own capitalist class, and, you know, rooted on World War I. We can't fall into that.
But there's a totally different conversation to have around that. I mean, I think that because people have innately, for lots of complex reasons, deeply feelings about who they are in terms of their nation.
Starts in kindergarten. You go to school here, you're in kindergarten, you have to put your hand on your chest and pledge allegiance to the flag.
But people have a
loyalty. Indoctrination starts very early here.
Everywhere.
No, not everywhere. I didn't grow up in Canada putting my hand on my chest here.
No, but you grew up in Canada being a Canadian. And
I rooted for a hockey team.
I rooted for a hockey team. Really? Which one?
Maple Leafs, of course.
Okay, fine. Just checking. Just checking. But I think that the nationalistic feelings are not uncommon around the globe, and that is easy to kind of bring out.
Of course, because it's in the interest of the ruling circles of every country to tell the people of the country, oh, we're all in the same boat because we're all Russians, Americans, Israelis, Germans, Canadians. Sure, they want everyone to identify that the elite interest is the national interest, but it's not. And we need to say it's not.
So is that done by the danger of kind of critiquing and pulling back from the whatever is happening here with what they call Russiagate, cannot supplant a real strategy in terms of how you cover the news, real strategy on what you fight for in this country to be aware of what's happening around you. I mean, right now they're giving away all the lands around the West and opening them up for exploration and oil and gas and coal and more. I mean, who's covering that with any intensity? Who's covering all the environmental regulations and energy regulations that Trump has just thrown aside and will continue to throw aside? No one's even kind of focusing on those things.
But this is very specific. Like, the military budget in this country is over $1 trillion in reality. They say $700–800 billion,
right,
but it's really over $1 trillion when you look at the pockets of money that are squirreled away for nuclear and Secret Service stuff and all the rest. That's money that should be paying for a Green New Deal. That's money that should be paying for public education. You can't justify, the pillaging of the public treasury for the sake of this kind of arms buildup without an enemy. So you got to, it's critical that the kind of chauvinism that's being built around this issue is separated from the political story, the corruption story, even the election meddling story. It's very, very important that that especially people that consider themselves progressives don't allow the Russophobia to take over the story. Then, sure, go to town.
So let's talk, before we conclude, let's talk a bit about then what you think has to be the way things should be covered, whether it's the real news, whether it's Democracy Now!, whether it's any kind of...
Well, what we've been trying to do is, first of all, what seems to be factually evident. So we've been going through a lot of the stuff is allegations. A lot of it is take American intelligence agency assertions as true, and just based on the experience with American intelligence agencies, there's no reason to take them on face value. So the number one thing at The Real News we've been trying to say is we won't take assertions based on faith. If it comes into the public domain and it's evidence that seems persuasive, then fine, we'll say so. There's some people cover this. There's a bit of a tendency to say all of it's BS, as if we know it's BS. We don't know that the Mueller stuff is going to turn out to be BS. It may turn out that all the accusations are true. And I've been saying from the beginning, if they're all true, it's still small stuff. It's minor stuff. In the scheme of what issues really face us as a people, this is such little stuff. They always interfere in each other's elections. Everybody plays for their advantage. They all influence whatever they can. I mean, the Americans overtly trying to bring down governments in Venezuela and other parts of Latin America. It goes on and on. This is normal global capitalist system stuff. The Americans, the only reason it's becoming this kind of issue, just to say it again, partisan advantage, and it goes to the heart of the military-industrial complex narrative that we have an existential threat and you got to spend $1 trillion a year.
We've been talking to the editor-in-chief here at The Real News, Paul Jay. And Paul, it's good to have this conversation with you. We should have these more in depth and longer, I think.
Well, let's do it.
I'd enjoy that.
Thank you.
And I'm Marc Steiner here with The Real News Network. Stay with us. Take care.